Dear writer, you need to quit. This is the show that helps you know what to quit, what to keep, and what to question. My name is Becca Syme, and I'm a Gallup certified strengths coach with thousands of hours of coaching 6- and 7-figure authors, mid-listers, major award winners, and new authors alike, because everyone needs to quit something. Anyone can tell you what worked for them, and of course they say it might not work for you, but they can't tell you why. Well, I can tell you why. Welcome to the QuitCast. Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 18 of the QuitCast. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the strengths for writers, themes, and how you can be better, faster at the things that you're already great at and stand out. And today, we're going to be talking about the theme of includer. So first of all, we're going to talk to Terry and Becca about how includer can act in your writing and how includer looks to people who are observing it. What are the common themes of includers? We're going to talk about that first. So take it away, Terry and Becca. Yes. So includer people are exceptionally talented at showing awareness of those who feel left out and making an effort to include them. So that's the sort of official Gallup version, is that they're very aware of when people are being excluded. So a harmony person, the difference between a harmony and includer is harmonies are looking for emotional balance, and we'll talk about harmony later, but includers are all about who's at the table, like whose voice is being heard. So high includers are the kind of people who, like, usually a high includer will have a story, you know, on the playground or in a play or in the classroom or at Sunday school or something. And then they have this story of exclusion that they'll get really emotional talking about. And it's what drives them to like include people as adults. And it's really pretty fascinating. Like every single includer I've ever met has a story like that.
That is pretty cool. Now I'm going to guess here, because you said the Clifton Strengths definition says awareness of those who feel left out and make an effort to include them.
Yep.
I have awesome awareness of who's left out. So it must be the part about including people that's the key.
But the difference is somebody like Ben would be the person who would think, you know, who we're not hearing from right now is a young adult writer, because we're all here talking about this, but we're not hearing the young adult writer voice. Or
that's what Ben would say.
Yeah, like he would think of the people who should be included who are not being included if we were going to make a decision about something.
What includer strengths are good for being a writer? How does it help them with their characters? I guess it would make for a rounded story. It would make them include.
They tend to write groups well. Like they tend to write like friend groups well. The interesting thing too is that a lot of includers will write includer type scenes or includer like there will be an undertone of like kids who are excluded from something who win in the end, or like someone who's excluded from a group who comes out making the group whole at the end, right? Like there's this sort of feeling like their emotional resonance is all about restoring groups and restoring
harmony.
No,
I know you don't want to say that, but
it's not harmony though. It's more like it's wholeness, because that's really what includers are noticing that isn't there. So today on the Strengths for Writers talk show section, I have a couple of really fantastic includers to talk to. The first is Ben Hale, who is an author friend and another author coach also. Ben is an author of YA and fantasy, and he has just recently passed the $2 million mark total in his book sales. And so congratulations, Ben. That was very exciting. And Laura von Holt is our other author we have today. Laura, those of you who know her from the Mermaid podcast, is a paranormal romance author, and she writes under the name Madame de Boudoir. And Laura is here with us today. And so take it away, Laura, Ben, and Becca. Laura, you've taken Strengths for Writers.
Mm-hmm.
How would you explain includer to someone if you were gonna like give them a 30-second definition?
I do talk about it all the time. I like to say includers like to include, and that's why I'm including you.
Yes.
So I would say it is the strength of including other perspectives, and then also including people and other parts into your process.
Yeah, so I would say the word is always really important, like the includer word. But I think sometimes too, when we think of includer, we think of like physical inclusion, which is very true. But the cool part about includer is they're also super aware of who's not being heard. Like who's not at the table, who are we not listening to, or whose perspective would be really important to hear right now that we haven't gotten, and how could we get their input into this conversation. And so that's a super important part of high includer. But yeah, definitely, I always think of the circle. And I think when I first met Ben, we met in person, and we were with a group of other authors, and he was always changing the circle to make sure that everyone physically could be present inside the circle while we were all talking to each other.
Sure.
And
I beat the chairs.
Yeah, I looked at Terry and I'm like, he's got to be an includer, because it's such an includer behavior to like physically change the space so that everyone feels like they're present to the conversation.
Yeah.
It's a subconscious includer behavior that's just so cool to watch. But and then so includer is one of the lowest commonly occurring strengths among the writers that I've coached. So in fact, I think it might be the lowest commonly occurring strength out of 34, if I remember right.
You mean it's less common in writers?
Yeah. So, and again, this is just in the writers that I've coached. So there's only 2,500 people in that group.
Only.
And so,
say there's only. I need a bigger sample.
I need a bigger sample. So I can't say that includer is not present among writers. It's just that the writers that come to me, it's much, much lower. So I think a ranger might have been one lower than includer. So includer might be 33. But what's really cool about it is that all it takes is one, right? So yay for includers, but yeah, it's very rare. It's not rare, interestingly, among the large sample population in the US. Like I think it's in the 20s, so it's not very high, 20 out of 34, but it's not as rare as it is among writers. So just a quick kind of intro question for you guys, and we'll start with Ben. Since learning about your includer, how have you seen that strength appear backwards for you, maybe in your career or in your writing? Do you see it appear in your writing?
I do see it appear in my writing. And it's interesting because when I write, I like most fantasy books. I'll use this as an example. So most fantasy books have like one or two primary heroes, one or two primary villains, and the whole book is the build-up between these two. They fight, usually the heroes win, book is over. That's really most fantasy books. And I found that I include a lot of variety of characters in my book series. I have some that are young, teenage age, some that are adults, some that are old, some have magic, some use a sword, some don't fight at all. And so, and all of them have facets to play in the overall story. So I usually have a variety of heroes and even the side characters. They don't just personify whether you fight, you're, worthwhile. And if you don't, then you're not. I don't have that in my books. There's just this huge variety of characters. And so I certainly thread it into my writing. I do it at in-person events as well. So when I'm talking to other writers, I really like to connect. That's one of my other ones, connectedness. But
connectedness, yeah.
I like to make sure that people are included. I recognize that authors tend to be more reserved and sometimes require an invitation to come in and to join or to do things. And without that invitation, they'll hang on the back. But from experience from when I was a little kid, I know what it feels like to want to be invited and how it can hurt if you're not. And so I'd certainly do that in in-person events and in my writing. It kind of threads and everything. Interestingly, my number one skill was strategic. And so it's not a subconscious thing for me. When I see someone that's on the outside, I consciously plan, how can I include them? It's a conscious act of how can I bring them into the conversation or bring them into the discussion? How can I make them feel more included, part of what's going on?
Yeah, Laura, I know that you also have an epic fantasy that you're working on. Do you see the same thing as far as characters that what Ben does?
I would not have noticed it until you pointed it out to me. In fact, I have the opposite experience where everything that I've naturally done as an includer was on a subconscious level, and now I work to identify when I'm doing it. But yeah, I write a lot of fairy tale retellings, and they're all from the point of view of other characters or characters I invented around in this world. And I would never have thought of that as a strength. It was just like, well, I don't know what they think. I'll tell their story.
Yeah, I love that too, because that's sort of the essence of includer, is the person whose voice we haven't heard yet, or the person whose voice has been excluded by the way that we've commonly told it before. And that is a really excellent manifestation of that. And I love that one of you is conscious of it and one of you wasn't. I mean, in the past, because it just goes to show that even in the same strength, there's just so much complexity of how it works. And I will say too, having been in group conversations with includers, a lot of what happens is somebody like me who has a very high communication skill will dominate conversations a lot. And includers are always looking to, like, how do I ask questions of someone who's not talking? How do I draw somebody into a conversation that isn't being utilized? And interestingly, in Ben and watching Ben coach, he's also includer strategically, not necessarily just with people, but with things like products and strategies and like concepts and things like that. So that it definitely is pervasive, I think, in your whole personality. So do you see any downsides of includer? Either one, let's start with Ben on this. Like, do you feel like you've ever seen a downside to includer before?
So, it's two minor ones. I'll put them in the same terms of writing and in person. So as a writer, I frequently tend to get the story much bigger, and then it's like harder to handle because I have so many characters or so much going on. It can be a challenge to wrangle it all, to keep it all together, to keep the story still linear. My current series, I'm in book 6, and I'm to the point that all of the, I would call principal characters, I think there's like 18. And at one point they're all together, and wow. They all come together, and now I'm going to divide them into groups, and now they're in different groups, and they're all going to go off and do various things. But there's so many, it's a challenge to keep them all together. It's kind of like the Avengers Infinity War. Like, there's so many characters, you want to do them all justice, but it's hard to do that. And so in the writing, that's a fine balance. In person, if I'm usually making the effort to include other people, it can mean that I'll go away without really reaching the goals that I personally want to get because I'm focused more on other people. Now, my strategic mind still allows me to do that, and that's my number one skill, offset that con, so to speak.
Yeah. What about you, Laura?
In like interpersonal situations, can get stressed out if I feel that I haven't included enough people or that someone was left out, or if I'll want to do something with only a few people, I will get nervous that I am making a mistake by not including more. And then as far as writing is concerned, I, in retrospect, have realized that I have to be very careful about who and when I take feedback from people. And if I include someone in my process before I'm ready for their perspective, it can be detrimental to me. So, but I don't really know if that's a downside. That I just I like people and what they have to say. So
yeah, well, you're also woo too, right? Like you're woo positivity includer, and Ben's and also empathy. Has woo includer. Yeah, and your empathy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really common to see woo includer, woo communication, and woo positivity show up together. So I think you both have all of those in your top 10 somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Those little strengths clusters.
Yeah.
Something that's really interesting that happens that I see in marketing and business with includers, like I had an includer client who was doing feedback in a group conversation where somebody was asking for market advice. And she just happened to ask a question about, like, well, have you ever thought that there's this whole group of readers that you're missing out on by not having paperbacks? And this person was not a romance writer and, you know, like hadn't really thought of, well, there's this whole market of people who are not reading ebooks, right? And so we kind of had this moment where this includer brought to the table, like, you're missing out on this audience because you're not thinking inclusively of everyone who could possibly read your book. And so I see even that there are benefits in it in like business and marketing. Have either one of you, let's start with Laura, have either one of you had an experience like that with Includer where it feels like this was a strategy that was applicable to my business as well?
Yes, I think it's two-part. The first is that I have always had some sort of writing group around me, and that was just kind of natural. And then once I went into romance, I made a bunch of romance author friends, and I was relying on them heavily for their, I didn't know this at the time, but they're all high strategic, high analytical, high ideation, and everything that I'm low on. And so I was like, this is so great. More people need this. And I forced us to make a Facebook group and like a larger community I wanted to give that to other people, but I also wanted anyone else we brought in to be kind of in my corner. And then the other thing specifically for marketing is that, so for instance, I have a podcast about mermaids because that's what I write. And I was the only mermaid podcast when I started, and then a few more joined, and my friends were like, how dare they? You have this market. And I was like, oh, no. I'll invite them on my podcast. And so I ended up having them as guests and then networking and cross-promoting with them. And then a third way is I now notice when I see includer in other marketing. And so I've noticed with like certain celebrities or politicians, when they include me in their process and I get to learn with them, that I respond to that. So I've started doing a lot of like behind the scenes videos and Instagram stories to include a wider audience and like what beyond just like I've launched a book and it's done, but like in like the total like creative life.
So like you're engaging them personally in your brand.
Right.
Oh, right. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Ben, what about you?
So as you were talking, Laura, it reminded me of, I was at an event and they did a breakout session based on genre, and so everyone was in, but the breakout session wasn't in different rooms, it was all in one big room. And everyone was talking, it was so loud. I mean, it was so loud. And it was the first time I joined the romance group because at the time I was writing a clean romance series and I wanted to learn more about that market and connect more. And I didn't know like any of your writers outside of just a few personally I'd met, but I didn't know them, you know, career-wise. I didn't know what they did or, you know, what they'd done in the market or anything. And it was obviously not working. I mean, the circle was as small as it could be. There was probably 45 women and me. And I remember that it was just so loud, you couldn't hear anything. And so I left and asked the people that were in charge, and I said, is there another room that we can use? We were the largest group. They said yes. I went to confirm that it worked, and then I came back, and I included the entire group. I said, let's all move to this other room. And it was quiet, and it was this perfect like U-shaped, and everyone got to be part of that. Yeah. And like I didn't really realize it until now as we were talking, but that was my effort to include the whole group into a setting that they could include each other, like be part of
and hear everybody's voice, right? Like where everyone's voice could be heard. That's a big deal.
It was, and it allowed everyone, especially the ones that are quieter, that they could hear because we were in a different room. And as far as a career, like my goal was just to include everyone, just get everybody in a place that they could be part of it and just make those connections. But I had a lot of career opportunities because they appreciated what I had done. And so because I included them, but because I sought an opportunity to make sure that they could all, you know, be part of that, they respected me. They invited me to things. They answered questions. I mean, there was a lot of things that came out of that one small moment at that event.
Yes, that we feel when we're excluded from something. And I mean excluded on any level. Like, well, they forgot about me, or they didn't invite me, or all the way to my voice isn't heard, or they didn't consider my opinion, right? Like, there's kind of a gamut of exclusion.
Yeah.
And the feelings that people feel when you include them, even to the point of like including a voice, or including a like writing something that your fans can have an opinion on, or bringing a perspective that they haven't seen before, or anything like that. The emotions that you feel when you get included are so powerful. And so having that experience with readers, it's one of the things I talk about in the Strengths for Writers class, which is the way that includers can write about the process of being excluded, or the way that you would feel if you include someone and they really feel heard for the first time. That's one of the most powerful emotions that you can communicate. And because so many people can identify, and there's a way that includers can write about it that no one else can. Like,
Yeah.
no one else can write about it the way that an includer can. So that's pretty powerful.
Connections. And when you use that skill, then as a career, like, people remember you, they connect with you, they appreciate you. And it wasn't you were doing it to be recognized necessarily, but, and I think people sense that, they recognize that.
Yeah. So if you were to say there's a bunch of includer writers out there listening to this podcast, and let's start with Laura, what would you say to includer writers as like your advice to them?
I would say to look for opportunities for collaboration or group work in any way that you can. However, whatever that means, if it's through like, marketing or networking, or, collaborating on projects or collaborating on marketing. And I would also say look for the hidden opportunities of it too, because it's not the most obvious writer strength, like you said, but it is very powerful because people do appreciate when it happens. So I think a little bit of it goes a long way. And I think you can also apply it to a customer service angle in the way that you talk to your readers, and the way that you communicate with them and make them feel included and taken care of in the process of putting out a book or marketing a book, or just being a part of your life.
So as you can hear from the high includer, there are a lot of traits that can be very beneficial as an author if you do have this strength. And even just one of the things we notice a lot is in being able to communicate well with other people in our lives who might have this particular strength. And I'll never forget one of the stories that comes up for me with high includer is working at a youth center that was had a very active after school presence. And we would consistently get questions about whether or not we would use a credit card machine as opposed to just being cash. And for so many years, it was like, no, cash is the easiest for us, cash only, cash only. And we had a volunteer who came in one day and was a very high includer. And she said, think of all those kids that you are not serving because you don't have a credit card machine. And so every time you say cash only, they feel excluded from the experience of being present at this youth center. And sure enough, immediately, one of the very first things we did the following year was to get a credit card machine active. And it was such a cool use of that includer theme to be able to think about, well, okay, we've been considering efficiency and we've been considering what's easiest for us, but we're also potentially leaving out a crowd of people who are not able to come in here and be served by us in our after school programs because we don't have a debit card or credit card machine. And so what a cool use of includer. That kind of behavior can be really helpful as an author in being able to write resonant emotional stories about exclusion or inclusion, to be able to offer perspectives that aren't being heard right now, to encourage us to embrace perspectives that aren't being heard. And so just as a high includer person, I would encourage you this week as your homework to go and read a book by someone that you wouldn't have ever considered reading a book before. Read a book by someone who's not like you and include a perspective that is not like your perspective, and be an includer, everybody, for a week. And so thank you again for listening to this podcast, listening to the QuickCast. We are so excited to be able to offer an opportunity for Strengths for Writers coaching cohorts coming up again. So if this has particularly resonated with you, please do check the links in the show notes and sign up for the Strengths for Writers class. So whether you have includer or any other strength, there are ways that you can use those strength themes, again, in the Clifton Strengths model, to be able to get better faster at your writing. And so we want to make sure to do that and to be able to stand out in the crowded marketplace. So please do take a look at that in the show notes. Also, of course, in the Patreon, we do live coaching calls every month so that you can get on and talk about what's going on with your writing career with me. And that is at the addicts level in the Patreon. If that's something that interests you, please do check that link out in the show notes. Otherwise, I am so glad that you were here today. As a mid-high includer, I love being able to include other people in the message of this podcast, which is really to focus on where you have the highest potential and where you have the highest ability to have impact in your writing career. And I want to see that happen for all of us. So until next week, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next QuickCast.